Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Josh Golden, the Senior Vice President of Strategy with Capital RX, and I'm thrilled to be here today, partnering with the Self-Insurance Institute of America, SIIA, to talk to you about PBM scrutiny. What is all the fuss about? I am coming to you live from Atlanta, Georgia, where it is a beautiful day today, 75 degrees and sunny. If it wasn't for all the pollen in the air, I probably would be taking this webinar from my backyard. But I think the last thing you all want to see is 60 minutes of me sneezing into my laptop. So I'll go ahead and stay indoors for this one. A little bit of background about me. I spent 20 years as a consultant, pharmacy benefits consulting, helping some of the largest plan sponsors in the United States navigate the rather murky waters of PBM land. During that time, anyone that knows me from that era knows that I was a pretty outspoken critic of the traditional PBM profit model. Which makes it kind of strange to see my name on a PBM business card now. But by the time we're done with this webinar and you get a little bit more acquainted with Capital RX and what we're all about, I think my move to this organization will all make perfect sense. So let's go ahead and jump right in. We've got a lot of ground to cover today. We're going to start with a recap of the current drug pricing landscape. Now, you've all seen charts like this before. These shows the cost of drugs going up year after year. Let's be honest, the traditional PBMs have had decades to solve the drug pricing dilemma in the United States. But if you look at the pattern of solutions that they have come up with over that time period, you start to see that they are largely self-serving. These are solutions that have served to increase the the opacity within the drug supply chain. They've diversified the profit model of the PBM, but they've really had no real impact on drug costs. And in fact, some of these strategies have actually, you could argue, contributed to drug price inflation in some indirect ways. So, I know pharmaceutical manufacturers often take a lot of heat publicly for drug price increases. But in reality, if you look at the stock performance of the various participants of the drug supply chain over the last decade and a half, you start to really see who the big winners in the supply chain have been. It's basically the traditional PBMs. These are organizations that have reached stock returns well above 1,000% over that time period, compared to manufacturer stock returns, which actually have been, for most large established manufacturers, relatively flat. And there's some important reasons for this that we're going to get into. But it's important to understand how PBMs have situated themselves within the supply chain that have allowed them to grow and financially at such a fast pace. Really, the PBM has evolved into sort of a financial hub or a nexus. They sit right at the very center of the supply chain. They touch every dollar of almost every drug purchasing transaction that occurs, every drug claim that is processed, every rebate that is paid. This has allowed them to vastly diversify the way that they make money. And so how does a typical PBM earn profit and keep their business running? Well, it depends on the PBM. Some PBMs, like Capital RX, for example, rely solely on administrative fees that are fully disclosed to clients. We believe that those really present no inherent conflict of interest, but most other PBMs rely on a mix of profit streams. They rely on a mix of indirect, hidden profitability. Each stream has a potential to create conflicts of interest. Now, we're going to explore some of these conflicts in detail. And of course, you can read through some examples here, profiting from a retail network spread, profiting from the ownership of dispensing assets where they're buying, drugs by the truckload and dispensing them at a much higher cost to patients, or retaining diverted pharmaceutical revenue, like rebates and other revenue streams. But before we go into some of these in detail, I want to acknowledge that we are at a particularly fascinating time for the PBM industry. We have entered an era of PBM scrutiny. Now, if 10 years ago, I would say most people probably didn't know what the acronym PBM stood for. So, trust me, I know. I have been in the industry for decades. I've been to cocktail parties. People have asked me what I did for a living, and I've seen the blank stares when I try to explain that I'm an expert in PBMs. But this is a new era now. This is the era of the high deductible health plan, where rising drug costs have quickly become a personal issue for many Americans. And where there are personal issues and personal concerns, the media is going to take notice. And that's exactly what has happened. We've seen investigative journalism now shining a light into the black box of the PBM model, both on the national level and regionally, and even on local newspapers and TV shows. And what else is interesting is that where public concern goes, you start to see political action develop pretty quickly. And that's exactly what's happened at the state level. So if you look over the last 3 years, from 2018 to 2020, state legislators across the United States have introduced 327 bills, separate bills, directly impacting PBM businesses. That means at least one bill was introduced in every single one of the 50 states, and across those 327 bills, 83 of them were successfully enacted into law across 38 states. That's a tremendous amount of legislative activity focused on a sector of the economy that was previously completely ignored. So this really is a sort of a reckoning, if you will, for the PBM industry. And in case you're wondering whether the legislative freight train is starting to lose steam, well, here we are in 2021, and we've got 88 additional bills currently under consideration in state legislators, in state legislative houses across the country. 38 states currently considering additional legislation. So the freight train is still running strong. There's still a lot of concern and focus on the political side around PBMs, how they might make money, and how they may or may not be contributing to some of the healthcare cost issues that our country suffers from more broadly. So what specifically do these bills attempt to address? Well, there's a sort of a wide array, if you will, a myriad of different issues that the bills attempt to solve for. Some of the more common issues that we see are, number one, prohibiting gag clauses. So this is where PBMs were contractually preventing pharmacies from telling patients that they could get their drug cheaper outside of the PBM's pricing scheme. You also see anti-steerage and equitable reimbursement rules. Now, these are really, I think, sort of a nod to the struggle of the independent retail pharmacies. What they tend to do is to prohibit PBMs from playing favorites with their own affiliated dispensing assets, like mail order pharmacies or specialty pharmacies. In other words, they might prevent the steering of patients to a mail order pharmacy, or they might prevent PBMs from paying their own retail pharmacies more than they pay their competitors. There are rules specifically designed to protect plan sponsor interests, like those preventing or prohibiting spread pricing, those requiring the full pass-through or at least the full disclosure of all rebate and pharmaceutical revenue that gets paid on the back end. There's even rules requiring the use of NADAC, National Average Drug Acquisition Cost, as a reference price in place of AWP. Don't worry, my fellow drug pricing nerds. We will be dipping deep into that topic in a few slides. We're gonna explore that particular aspect of drug pricing a little more deeply. Now, critics or sort of commentators on this process are usually quick to point out that many of these rules apply typically to state-funded plans only, Medicare plans, fully insured plans, et cetera, and they're exempted by ERISA from applying to most employer sort of self-insured employer-sponsored health plans. But even that ERISA exemption is sort of coming into question. So here we are in December 2020, and PBMs find themselves in the most unlikely place on the national judicial stage, in the Supreme Court of the United States, arguing in a case called Rutledge versus PCMA. Many of you on the call today may be familiar with this. Some of you may not understand fully what it was all about. A quick synopsis here. Arkansas passed a law called Act 900. It required PBMs to pay pharmacies a reasonable reimbursement rate at or above their acquisition cost for the drugs that they're dispensing. PCMA, the lobby group for large traditional PBMs, argued that this state law really shouldn't apply because it was preempted by ERISA and therefore didn't hold water. The court overturned the appellate court decision here. They decided unanimously, 8-0 in the decision, that Act 900 was not preempted by ERISA, and the law stands now in Arkansas. So a really, really fascinating sort of turn of events, both in the area of public scrutiny among patients and among plan sponsors, as well as in the media and now on the political stage and even in the judicial realm, where PBMs are suddenly finding themselves in the spotlight. So I'll pause here for a moment because there's lots more ground to cover, but I want to just see if there's any questions. Amy, if I can just check in with you. Any questions come in yet that we want to tackle?
Not yet.
All right, great. Well, let's continue on. So, a lot of the issues that we talk about here, a lot of the sort of the challenges that the various laws and rules are attempting to solve for, and a lot of the scrutiny that the media is giving to the PBMs really focuses on the typical PBM business model, the typical, what we call the traditional PBM business model, which is at its heart a tale of two ledgers. On the right-hand side, you've got the ledger of pricing that the PBM negotiates with the drug supply chain, with retail pharmacies, for example, or with pharmaceutical companies for rebates. And on the left-hand side is the ledger that the PBM decides to offer to each individual client. And that ledger is different for each client. And in between ledger 1 and ledger 2 is an area of dark profitability. It's all hidden profit for the PBM. I think we know what that means. That means that as value flows down the supply chain and moves, for example, if a retail pharmacy offers a price concession, or if a pharmaceutical manufacturer offers a higher rebate, that can quickly and easily be diverted by the PBM into increased profitability and never makes its way to the plan sponsor or the patient where it actually belongs. And the real challenge there is that hidden profitability can, in many cases, encourage bad behavior among PBMs. So let's pop through a couple of examples of that. There's probably no better example than the curious case of this product here, Duexis. This product is, if I may be so blunt, the poster child for everything that is wrong with drug pricing in the United States. It is a drug costing about $2,500 or more as an AWP, and it is comprised very simply of two active ingredients, Advil and Pepcid. The active ingredients in Advil, ibuprofen, and Pepcid, both of which are, as you all widely know, and you probably have both of these in your medicine cabinet. These are available widely on an over-the-counter basis for about $20, $25 a month. So this is, at first glance, pretty absurd. What plan would possibly cover a drug that's simply two OTC products mixed together at a cost of $2,500? But the surprising thing is that at one time or another, this drug has found its way onto the drug formularies, the preferred drug lists of just about every major traditional PBM. And to understand why, we simply have to peel the onion here and take a look at what the typical rebate is for a product like Duexis. In this case, we've made an estimate, I've sort of come up with an estimate based on my industry intel that I was able to gather. So to the extent that the PBM retains a portion of that rebate, even for some of their clients. So they may offer to pass through all of that rebate to some of their larger clients. But if they're keeping a portion of that pharmaceutical manufacturer revenue for a subset of their clients, then that's going to influence the way that they design their formulary, and it's going to cause them to make decisions that result in inefficiency in terms of drug mix and how they're promoting drugs across their entire book of business. So it can affect all of their clients. So that's one pretty straightforward example. Let's see, a couple questions coming through. So thank you very much for that. I'm gonna maybe try to tackle one or two of them as we come up to our next break. So I'm just gonna kind of continue on another couple slides, and then we're gonna jump to some questions here. So I wanted to share another example of how PBM profit, indirect PBM profit can cause bad behavior. And really the perfect example here is the way PBMs profit from dispensing. So to the extent that a PBM owns a mail order, a specialty drug dispensing facility, they will over time, to be certain, seek to dispense more drugs and more expensive drugs. This is their obligation to their shareholders to maximize profit. If you're the person responsible for managing the P&L for this mail order pharmacy here, and you've got a patient with a condition that could reasonably be treated by several different types of therapies, let's say it's mild to moderate psoriasis, could be treated by a topical steroid at $50 or a specialty injectable drug at a cost of $7,500. If you take a look at the margin profile for each of those products, you have to ask yourself, where will you try to steer patients over time if your goal or objective is to optimize profit for your shareholders? And that's exactly what we see happen in the traditional model. It happens in subtle ways. For example, prior authorizations are designed to sort of serve as a gatekeeper to make sure that people should get the drug only if they satisfy certain criteria. But what we see a lot of times with traditional PBMs that own specialty dispensing facilities is that the prior authorization approval rates for some of those specialty products can hover in the high 90s, sometimes 100% approval rate for some clients for patients taking those products. And again, a lot of that comes from, these are functions that should be serving as a gatekeeper, but unfortunately the gate's been left wide open because of the misalignment of financial incentives here. So I'm going to pause here for a moment before I get to, because I've sort of outlined the problem, I think, pretty well. The next step is to talk a little bit about the solution, but let me go ahead and tackle a couple questions that have come in. So yes, could you cover the PBM fees tied to medication adherence for pharmacies and penalties associated with such measures? So this is great. So as we get back to the PBM profit model, this is a pretty sophisticated question. Most plan sponsors aren't even aware that there are a whole set of fees, clawbacks, and other sort of financial exchanges that occur even long after a claim is processed, in which the PBM has an opportunity to seek additional profit off of a claim that has long since processed in the past. Examples of those include network participation fees, which can range in some cases from 25 cents up to $1.50 per claim. None of that ends up getting passed back to plan sponsors, or clawbacks or other sort of penalties that may be ostensibly tied to performance metrics, but in reality, it's just an opportunity for that PBM, again, to squeeze additional margin out of those retail claims without having to pass any of those price concessions back to plan sponsors. We have a question here. How do PBMs deal with pharmacy contracts, retail pharmacy contracts? For example, does CVS get a better price than a mom and pop pharmacy? That actually is a fantastic question, and one that we're going to delve into when we get into the topic of MAC lists a little bit later in the discussion. So I'm excited to talk about that, but I'm going to put that question on ice for a moment while we move through a couple of additional topics. So here we go. Let's talk about the solution, because I think we all now at this point have a sense of the challenge, which is this dual ledger system, which creates a wide gap for sort of dark money profitability among the traditional PBMs. So what's the solution then? Well, if the dual ledger system is at the heart of the problem, the solution actually is pretty simple. Get rid of the two ledgers and move to a single ledger system. And that's exactly what Capital RX has done with our clearinghouse model. So we have connected plan sponsors and patients directly with the actual cost of each drug for every single claim on every single drug. We call this claim level price accountability. That's really, really, really critical. This means that as price concessions flow down the supply chain, that those price concessions flow through, they're not diverted by the PBM, they flow directly through to the plan sponsor and the patient, which is where they belong. This is really the first time that a PBM has offered price accountability at the claim level. So you have to kind of orient yourself to the typical PBM deal, in which a PBM negotiates sort of floating average targets with a plan sponsor. They have a whole year to hit or not hit those targets. And then they usually about 6 or 9 months after the fact, before the client comes around, audits them, finds out that they missed the target, and then they have to pay up a penalty or potentially argue against the audit results. So this is a really sort of clunky, cumbersome, rolling average mathematical system that was concocted by the PBMs in an attempt, in essence, to avoid accountability on the claim level. So this means that a PBM can, under the current typical system, charge whatever they want for each given claim, as long as over the course of the year after they're audited, they can prove that they hit or got near the target that they promised the client in the aggregate for the whole year. So we decided to do away with all of that. We were done with describing pricing in paragraphs and words. We moved to describing pricing with actual price lists. But when we set out to do this, there was something big that stood in our way. We knew it had to go. And this is what it is. It's AWP, average wholesale price. So despite being the favorite drug price list, and probably the price list that's used in the vast majority or nearly every PBM client contract out there, AWP, or average wholesale price, is really probably the worst price index of the bunch. It is a terrible predictor of actual drug prices. If you were to design a price list that the industry was going to use to track drug pricing and to contract on pricing, you would want it to have a couple of big characteristics, key characteristics. One, you'd want it to be based on real world data. Is AWP? No. It is created by a single entity, the drug manufacturer. It can be set really at any level that the manufacturer wants. There are no rules or regulations about how it is determined. And as a result, there are no safeguards or guardrails around where AWP goes. And that's why, generally speaking, it goes up over time. Another characteristic you'd want on a drug price index is that it actually correlates to real drug prices taking place out in the marketplace. AWP, not so much. We see discounts off of AWP swinging from negative 99% for some generics, all the way up to AWP plus 25% for compounds and other oddball claims. So, you know, the correlation is just not there. Drug prices are all over the place relative to AWP. The third characteristic you would likely want in a drug price index is that it not be subject to artificial manipulation or inflation. But unfortunately, just looking back at the history of AWP, we know that that's not the case. Anyone that was in the industry about 8 years ago remembers very well that there were a series of lawsuits at the national level that exposed the manipulation that was going on by the supply chain and caused the entire supply chain to have to sort of rework AWP in what they called the AWP rollback. So again, there's demonstrated evidence that this index, this price list, is riddled with problems. And what's worse, it's not even publicly available. You have to pay to get it, which makes it that much more challenging for a plan sponsor to validate the pricing that they've been promised by their PBM. So I should mention that the biggest publisher of AWP, Wolters Kluwer, they own Metaspan, they actually have a disclaimer on their website that says AWP does not reflect and should not be assumed to represent actual prices paid for drug products. So we have actually the publisher of AWP acknowledging this is really not a drug price list that should be used to track drug prices, and yet this is the list that PBMs have decided to use across the board in nearly every single client contract that they have. Why is it? Well, as long as AWP is in place, the PBM knows that they cannot be held accountable for claim level price accountability. It opens the door for the dual ledger system that I described previously, and it helps those PBMs generate tremendous hidden profit via spread pricing. So we knew right off the bat that AWP had to go. In fact, we have a little joke internally, and of course, I think you probably have seen other people reference this in the industry. Those of us, particularly in the South, get a kick out of the phrase. AWP means ain't what's paid. That's what it stands for. Now, we knew AWP had to go. We knew there were better drug price lists out there. And where we landed was one called National Average Drug Acquisition Cost. So this is an index that, unlike AWP, is based on real world data. So it tracks actual prices paid on an invoice by actual real world retailers. It's published by CMS on a weekly basis. It's not susceptible to the whims of any profit-seeking companies. And the best part is it's already market tested. It's in use by a majority, 40+ state Medicaid programs to help guide retail reimbursement. So to be clear, we did not invent this index. We're just the first PBM to bring NADAC to commercial plan sponsors like large employers, labor unions, and health plans. We quickly assembled a retail network of over 60,000 retail pharmacies, every single major chain in the United States, who have all agreed to be reimbursed on this acquisition cost plus structure. For them, it makes more sense. because under the current MAC list arrangement, they are, as you saw from some of the laws and lawsuits and court cases that we discussed, in many cases asked to dispense drugs at a reimbursement rate that's below what it costs them to even put that drug on their shelves. Under a NADAC plus arrangement, they don't get reimbursed more in the aggregate. In fact, overall, our pricing for drugs and the ingredient cost tends to be lower than under an AWP-based arrangement, but at least their profitability is more stable on a claim-to-claim basis. So we had very little trouble assembling the network, and now we've got the largest, and I believe the only commercially available NADAC-based retail network in the industry. Now, some really interesting stuff happened when we developed this network, this model. The first thing we started to do was tracking AWP and NADAC and how they behaved over time. I do see a couple questions coming in on NADAC, and so looks like I was right. We do have some drug pricing nerds like myself among the audience members, so I'm looking forward to getting to those. We'll hit those in a moment at the next pause point. So I do want to highlight before we get to the questions, our findings from a recent white paper we put out around the behavior of AWP versus NADAC. We looked at the entire market basket of available drugs that was of generic drugs that was available over a recent 5-year period from 2015 to 2000. We saw during that time period that AWP, the average AWP for that market basket actually increased by a percentage point. Everyone who buys large quantities of drugs, say someone who owns a retail pharmacy, for example, always chuckles when they see that result, because they know that in the real world, generic drugs have actually been rapidly deflating over the last 5 years consistently. And so if you look at NADAC, the retailer's actual acquisition cost over that time period, NADAC for that same market basket of drugs has decreased consistently between 5 and 10 percentage points per year, resulting in a total deflation of about 52% compared to the 1% inflation that AWP had. So the reason I love this chart is because it illustrates in a very clear visual manner the dual ledger model of a traditional PBM in action. So what a PBM does is they contract with plan sponsors on the blue line. Your contract includes AWP-based metrics, but they acquire and negotiate with the supply chain at or below the orange line when they stock drugs at their mail order center, for example. And everything in between the orange line and the blue line is that pure hidden profitability that I referenced on the prior slide. So this really is sort of that dual ledger model in action. Capital RX is the first PBM, to our knowledge, to move our entire book to the orange line in all of our contracts. So our contracts reference NADAC plus a fair dispensing fee and a fully disclosed admin fee. It's a fee for service, cost plus arrangement. And in doing so, we've attached our clients' contracts to a price index that is organically decreasing over time, at least for generic drugs. Now, there's a couple questions here. Coming in around NADAC. So while we're sitting on this slide, I'll go ahead and address them. One is that I know likely comes up is, is NADAC available for every single drug? Well, it's available for most all of the drugs that are dispensed commonly in a retail setting because it's based on retail surveys. So it's available for roughly 98.5% of retail claim transactions. There are admittedly some drugs, some oddball drugs, like vaccines and some other oddball claims that don't tend to have a NADAC because there's not enough survey data gathered for those. But those represent really a de minimis portion of retail claims, and we have an easy workaround for that within our model. We simply backstop that with a different pricing metric. We use AWP right now, at least for that small subset of claims. Another question is around specialty drugs. There are many specialty drugs that do have a NADAC because they're commonly dispensed in a retail setting. For those that do not, we actually have a separate price list that we've negotiated with our with our mail order and specialty drug partners. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how that's set up a little bit deeper into the conversation. But it is affiliated with NADAC. NADAC is a backstop on that negotiated price list where it does exist for the specialty drug. Where it doesn't, I'm going to explain how we maintain competitive pressure in that ecosystem. Let's see, I think I've hit a number of the NADAC questions. Why don't we go ahead and move on, and we can circle back with some additional NADAC questions as we reach towards the end of the discussion. So I bet you're all wondering, okay, we've moved our clients to NADAC, we've got this fully aligned model, we don't profit from dispensing, we don't divert any rebates into our own pocket. How has this played out for our client base? We don't always have reliable invoice and cost information from the client's prior PBM arrangement, but believe it or not, for a good subset of our clients, we do actually receive, or we do actually get the client to share those prior invoices with us. So forget about consultant models, forget about cost projections and what if scenarios. We wanted to know, comparing invoice to invoice, prior year with the last PBM, first year with Capital RX, what is the actual invoice to invoice comparative cost? And the result here, I believe, is really telling. For those clients where we were able to obtain that reliable cost information from their prior relationship, we saw an average negative 13% cost differential. That compares against an industry average increase of about 2%, which is typical trend rate for most clients just sitting back and doing nothing. So these are pretty sizable savings. I don't want to create the perception that this is going to increase year over year for a client that comes on board. So this is really what I would say is a one-time recalibration that occurs when a client moves from a bloated, traditional sort of profit-seeking PBM model to a fully aligned cost-plus model. The results are consistent. So we saw every single client where we had data did see savings that was roughly more or less within this range. Some were a little higher, some were a little lower. And it came from a couple of different sources. Number one, it came from the pricing model, which passes all the rebates back. Because again, this comparison includes all cost aspects. It includes drug cost, rebates, administrative fees, et cetera. So to the extent that we were now pushing all rebates back to those clients, that obviously represented a cost win for the client, a net cost decrease. It also comes from the way that we manage drugs, because if we are aligned with the client and we're not profiting from dispensing, we're going to be a better steward of the plan sponsor's very limited assets. We're going to move patients towards more cost-effective drugs, and that's what comprised probably about half of the savings as we did our internal analyses here. So about half of it came from a more efficient pricing model, about half of it came from just making smarter decisions about how we manage drug mix. Simple things like turning off auto refill triggers that were set to trigger auto refills at 70% therapy completion. And these were mechanisms that were driving adherence rates of 125% for some patients, meaning that at the end of the year, that patient had used 125% of the volume of pills that they needed for a given year. In other words, they had extra pills sitting in their medicine cabinet that the plan sponsor had paid for. So again, simple actions like that allowed us to help our clients achieve a better overall cost outcome, something that we're incredibly proud of. The financial model is not all we're about. We have other aspects to our business that we're very proud and excited about, a service model that we believe is second to none. I'm going to touch on a little bit of that later, but this is not really an advertisement for Capital RX. It's more an exploration of how a move to an alternative model, an alternative PBM profit structure, can fundamentally change the entire cost dynamic for a set of clients. So we got a couple questions here now. I'm going to pause again. So one question is, a 13% decrease shows strong results. Can you clarify that this is net of rebates? Yes, this is net of rebates, admin fees, and all of the core cost elements that the client incurred over the course of the prior year and the current year with Capital RX. And what is the average client size that we polled? For this, we had a mix of clients. Some of them were fairly large, let's say north of 15,000 plan members. We had a mix of some smaller clients as well, some in the sort of the low single thousands, so 3,000, 5,000, et cetera. So there was sort of a diverse mix of clients, and that is reflective of our client base, which is a diverse mix of medium-sized clients, much larger clients, jumbo plan sponsors, as well as health plans. So we also service health plans that have their own downstream clients under what we call a PBA relationship. Are rebates paid as an aggregate, i.e. fully funded quarter all at once? Rebate payments under our model occur in sync with the rebate payments that we receive from our upstream partners, and that does occur on a quarterly basis. The difference here under our model is we don't withhold anything, we don't divert anything. We'll show clients the rebate checks, and we will even disclose to them drug level rebate information to help them make smarter decisions about managing their benefit. I'll show you some examples of that. All right. I'm going to get to the rest of the questions a little bit later. We've got some really great and very intelligent questions coming through the question stream here, so thank you all for your engagement. I really appreciate it. I wanted to, again, this wasn't really intended to be a big sales pitch, more of an academic discussion. And so I wanted to spend a good chunk of time here talking about the problems that I saw in my most recent years as a consultant, and the problems that I continue to see as I advise plan sponsors on kind of how to navigate the PBM landscape. The big problems that we typically see with many PBM deals. I want to walk through some examples. So consider this kind of a checklist, if you will, as a way to think carefully about your own arrangement that you might have or your client's arrangements with their PBM and how you might seek to optimize those. So the first question is, the first problem that we run across is one that I think I've already covered, the fundamental issues with AWP and MAC lists, the fact that these pricing metrics are usually measured in an annual average effective rate that can be gamed or manipulated on a claim-by-claim basis, and that's how the PBM extracts a lot of hidden profit. So there's actually a pretty easy way to get around this. Replace AWP and MAC lists with a more rational price list. I think there's no surprise here. I've already sort of exposed the punchline on this one, if you will. We've moved to NADAC. It's not the only alternative price list out there, but it is one that we believe ideally suits the plan sponsor marketplace. It correlates to the real cost of drugs because it's based on survey data. It behaves the same for brands and generics, which means I don't even need brand and generic definitions in my contract with a client. It doesn't matter. I should say NADAC doesn't care whether a drug is brand or generic. It's simply a price for a product. Every drug just has a price. It can't be manipulated by pharmaceutical companies or PBMs. It's free and easily accessible. In 2 clicks, you can actually download the pricing file from the CMS website. Be happy to share a link to do so if you're curious. And speaking of CMS, it's managed by an objective government entity. So it's the price list that we've chosen, certainly not the only one out there. But be advised, AWP and MAC lists are not the only way of doing business in the PBM industry anymore. Problem number 2. I think we've covered this a little bit as well. The PBM has a fundamental conflict. They own mail order and specialty dispensing, and at the same time, they're steering utilization and managing drug mix. So how do you overcome this conflict? The answer, again, quite simple. Identify PBM partners that do not own conflicted assets. Under our model and some other PBMs that share our model, we as a PBM have a single task. It's to objectively steer patients to the optimal therapy according to the interests of the plan, the financial constraints, and what's going to be the best health and cost outcome. Our profit is not tied in any way to the volume or the choice of drugs being dispensed. Our third party, their job, our third party mail order and specialty pharmacy, their job is to simply dispense the product as instructed with a high level of service and a very competitive cost. In fact, we've taken it one step further. If you've got the opportunity, find a PBM that has a one-to-many ecosystem, multiple mail order and specialty partners. This is what Capital RX has done, and it helps us maintain an ecosystem where we apply competitive pressure on all of our strategic partners, ensuring that our clients get the lowest possible price at any point in time on any product. This is what we found kind of silly. This is the same philosophy that large PBMs use on their retail networks. They say that they're pitting one large chain against another, creating a competitive ecosystem, a broad network where chains are fighting it out on price to ensure that they pass through that low price to plan sponsors. Yet for some reason, when you ask them about mail order and specialty, they demand exclusivity. Competition is off the table. But I think we all know what happens to price over time when you get rid of competition. And so we wanted to eliminate that inflationary tendency, and the way we did it is creating this ecosystem of multiple mail order and specialty partners, which again allows us to maintain competition. The third problem, again, we've touched on some of these, but we're about to dig deep. The PBM retains an unknown portion of pharma revenue. So, we casually refer to these as rebates, but I think we all know at this point that pharma revenue is more than just rebates. There's inflation protection penalty dollars, there's rebate administrative fees, there's all sorts of cloak and dagger financial exchanges that occur behind the scenes that are in many cases very difficult to unearth or discover. What you need to do is identify PBM partners that can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they do not retain any of those revenue streams. A lot of it comes down to the contract. So here's a clipboard with some questions on it that you might ask to get the dialogue started with your current PBM around the current setup you have for rebates. Does the definition of rebates in your contract include every single dollar of revenue that they're collecting from pharmaceutical companies on your behalf? What about inflation protection penalty payments? What about the sale of your data to pharmaceutical companies, which happens all the time? What about the revenue derived from that? Will they disclose drug rebates that they're receiving at the drug level? This is a huge differentiator for our organization. We believe philosophically that is financial information that belongs in the hands of plan sponsors. You as plan sponsors are tasked with making really tough decisions about how to manage drug mix and manage the way your plan members are utilizing drugs. And you're being asked to do it in most cases with only half of the financial information at your disposal. So we're done with the sort of the wizards in the high castle that keep rebates behind locked doors. If you're a plan sponsor on our platform and you're looking to make more sophisticated decisions around drug coverage, prior authorization, exclusions, et cetera, we will sit down with you and share drug level information on rebates that'll empower you to make those decisions in a smarter way. We'll show you the actual rebate checks that we receive from pharmaceutical companies. Again, these are simple questions you can ask your current PBM to determine the level of transparency that you're receiving on rebates. Full audit rights are a must-have for any rebate arrangement. We rarely do get audited, but we welcome audits on our rebates, and we have easy ways of demonstrating to clients that we do have a complete and full pass-through. So problem number 4, pricing terms. I think we've talked about this as well. They're based on rolling average results. The PBM is not accountable on a claim-by-claim basis. To be clear, the moment you allow a PBM a full year to hit a target, you have given them permission to charge whatever they want on a claim-by-claim basis. And they have a year to make it up. So this is what, again, sort of another thing that we were scratching our heads as we started with a clean sheet of paper. The founders of our organization, our CEO, our COO, our CTO sat down with a blank sheet of paper mentality. They said, if we were going to design the system from the ground up, what would we get rid of? Well, every drug should just have a price. That was one of the sort of the founding philosophies here. And believe it or not, drugs already have prices up the supply chain. So the manufacturer has a price when it leaves their facility. The wholesaler knows the price that they acquire at and the price that they sell every pill at. And same with the PBM. They know prices down at the drug level. The only reason the PBM won't give you as a plan sponsor the claim level price is because it eliminates their ability to manipulate that price on a claim by claim basis to derive that profit that we talked about. So again, the solution here, negotiate claim level pricing commitments on all drugs. There are some clear advantages here. The PBM is held accountable for every single claim that processes. It eliminates the PBM's ability to game those guarantees. It makes your audit process remarkably simpler, and you can validate pricing at any time. So under our model, NADAC is available from the CMS website. We have clients that on January 3rd, January 4th, want to check that the pricing is being adjudicated correctly. They simply go to the CMS website, ping the NDC, check it against the claim that's processed, and there you go. You don't have to wait till the end of the year to formally audit a PBM to validate whether or not they're doing things correctly. Problem number 5, pricing terms. I mean, we mentioned those annual averages, those effective rates, those fractions that create the targets that the PBM uses in their contract. Well, I think we all know that those are not straightforward. In many cases, there's a whole Christmas tree full of ornaments attached to it, all the exclusions, caveats, fine print, that gives the PBM a tremendous amount of wiggle room in terms of how they perform or how they seem to perform against those targets. The solution here, wherever possible, where you do have to have annual average effective rate pricing terms, restructure those to minimize or eliminate PBM gameplay. So here's a perfect example that we've done with many of our clients. PBMs love to structure their minimum rebate guarantees on a per brand claim basis. They know that this allows them to define what is and what is not a brand, and therefore control the denominator in that per brand claim fraction. If they can control the denominator, they can control the outcome of the fraction. What we would recommend as an alternative, and again, it really only makes sense if every PBM in a bid process agrees to this protocol, but structure the rebate guarantees on a per member per month basis or per member per year basis. You and I can argue all day and all night about what constitutes a brand drug versus a non-brand drug. But I think it's going to be pretty hard for us to get into a debate about what constitutes a member. It's a human being with a pulse. So this is how we see it play out when the guarantee is structured on a per brand claim basis, and we know that there are exclusions in play. Then the estimated annual value ends up being a range. We don't know exactly what it's going to be because it swings based on the types of exclusions and how those exclusions are treated. Under a PMPM guarantee, when a consultant goes to project that value for the client, they can project with certainty to the dollar because they know that that guarantee does not have any caveats in it. So again, we're careful around how we deploy this because the per brand claim basis does allow a competitor of ours, say, to inflate the value, the perceived value of their rebates. But where we know there's a level playing field, we will be happy and in fact encourage consultants to solicit bids on that PMPM basis, in which case we have an ability to show the full value of our rebate pass-through there. So, we've talked a lot about different problems that you might encounter in a typical PBM arrangement and what you might do to address those. I did want to take a moment and talk a little bit about this phrase pass-through pricing that we hear a lot in the industry. I intentionally avoid the word transparency in many cases when I'm talking about our business model, because I would argue that that word has been pretty widely used and in some cases abused within the PBM industry. There are many PBMs that purport to be transparent PBMs or full pass-through PBMs that are still deriving a lot of indirect profitability that's not fully disclosed. I would argue that a more important word for us is alignment. At every decision that we make, every step along the way, our North Star, our guidepost for making that decision is what is going to keep our interests aligned with those of our plan sponsor clients. I do hear a lot of consultants come to me and say, well, you guys are often offering 100% pass-through of rebates and a full pass-through of your retail network arrangement. It sounds to me like just another pass-through arrangement. So I do want to kind of dispel this myth around the typical pass-through deal, because a pass-through AWP-based deal is still fundamentally problematic. Now, aside from the fact that the client is still tethered to average wholesale price as a price metric, which we all know shows inflation and isn't tracked by surveys, is pretty arbitrary as a price index, we have the other even bigger issue of MAC list juggling. Now, what you need to understand, and you may be already aware of this if you're a pretty sophisticated buyer in this space, is that PBMs don't have just one price list with their upstream partners, their retail providers, their pharmaceutical company suppliers. They have multiple. In the retail setting, these come in the form of MAC lists or maximum allowable cost lists. Now, they will strike multiple arrangements with each chain and then multiple arrangements across different chains. And there's no guarantee that a client is going to stay on a given MAC list. And so when you agree to allow a PBM to use MAC lists, you're also agreeing to have that PBM move you as a client from one MAC list to another at their full discretion. And so that PBM is still fully in control of the price that is actually being passed through to the client at any point in time. They may be offering a full pass-through, but it may be a full pass-through of their worst MAC list rate. Let's say MAC list C here, which equates to an AWP minus 70 or 75% discount. Because they maintain these multiple price lists and because they can move clients from one list to another, the PBM is still acting as a price manipulator, even under a full pass-through arrangement. And they can indirectly derive revenue from a full pass-through client because their revenue is derived at the chain level, not the client level. Their profitability in the retail setting rolls up to that chain level contract. In fact, traditional PBMs, believe it or not, have entire teams of people that spend all day basically just doing this, monitoring the performance of different MAC lists across different clients and different chains and making tiny adjustments, MAC list manipulation, movements of a client from MAC list A to MAC list B to MAC list C, to hone in on a desired outcome to make sure that they don't overperform against any financial commitment that they've made. I have a couple of young kids. We're huge fans of Dr. Seuss. I saw this image and I couldn't help bringing it in. If you want to visualize the most absurd example of an over-engineered profit model, then you have to picture this guy, the PBM MAC list manager, staying up all night, carefully counting claims and dollars to squeeze every possible penny of spread out of their book of business within the retail setting. There is a better way. There is a simpler way. We don't have this guy in our employment. We don't have any MAC lists in our system. They're not necessary under a NADAC cost plus model. It completely eliminates the need for the PBM to own and manipulate pricing. And under our arrangement, unlike the PBM that has a different MAC list for each client, or even a different MAC list for the same client over time, all of our clients receive the same price. This was fundamental to the way that we wanted a drug pricing model to work. We don't play favorites with clients because we can't. We charge potentially a slightly different admin fee to different clients based on their size, their complexity, the administrative burden that we're going to incur. We show the client what their admin fee is and why it is what it is, and we demonstrate the value that we provide for that admin fee. But we can't and don't play favorites with drug price because every drug should just have a simple, straightforward price. So that's really at the heart of our model. I definitely want to, we've got a ton of questions here, Amy, so I definitely want to make sure we leave some time for questions here. I do want to recap the recommendations that I have as you're thinking critically about your current PBM arrangement or those of your clients. Consider these recommendations. AWP and MAC is not the only way of doing business anymore. And many consultants are now sophisticated enough to be able to assess an AWP-based model that a client currently has against an alternative model like NADAC or other cost plus models. And to the extent that a consultant is not confident around how to do that, we have a very collaborative approach to our proposal process in which we'll educate the consultant, help them understand the mechanics of NADAC, how it compares to AWP, how it trends differently, as you saw on that slide with the diverging trend rates, etc. Number two, identify PBM partners that don't own conflicted assets, mail order, specialty, retail pharmacies. Number three, identify partners that can prove that they don't retain pharma revenue beyond a shadow of a doubt. Negotiate claim level pricing commitments. Please don't give your PBM carte blanche to charge whatever they want on any given claim. And restructure those pricing terms to eliminate the ability for the PBM to play games. You're going to find that this fully aligned PBM arrangement, if you're able to achieve that, is going to drive better financial and health outcomes for you or your plan sponsor clients. You can either get your current PBM to move the needle, to come onto this type of structure, or if you want the easier route, come to Capital RX or other similar vendors that are already offering this type of model in the marketplace. Let us help you get there much more efficiently and quickly. So I'm going to park it here. I hinted earlier on that our PBM model is not all about financials. It's not all about clearinghouse and cost plus and NADAC. Certainly that's received a lot of attention over the last year, but there are other aspects to our model that we are incredibly proud of. Number one, our service model. From the moment a client implements with us, they have a fantastic experience. That's not just anecdotal, it's survey proven. So we survey every client that comes on board. We actually implemented and transitioned over 70 clients for 1/1 of this year. We surveyed all of them on the implementation process. We received a 100% satisfied or very satisfied result, meaning that all of our clients demonstrated implementation satisfaction. So from that first moment a client comes on board with us, we are at the ready to make sure that that transition is smooth. The other statistic that you'll hear us shout from the mountaintops, sorry if we've been sort of beating you over the head with press releases and announcements on LinkedIn, et cetera, about this, but it is something that we love to ring the bell on and love to let people know about, and it is our Net Promoter Score. Across our client base, this is a metric that we track carefully. Other PBMs track on their NPS. Most other PBMs don't brag about it because it typically is not all that impressive. In some cases down in the single digits for some larger healthcare organizations. NPS in the healthcare world is notoriously difficult to maintain. We are incredibly proud of our client level NPS, which sits at 96 currently. Again, apologies if you've seen this 100 times. It's something we love bragging about because it's something we feel we've earned with our very unique service model. So again, I know we spent a lot of time talking about financials, but Capital RX is more than just a financial model. We are a full service PBM with a fantastic service record for our clients, and we'd be thrilled to help you usher you or your clients into that next generation PBM model that we think the industry is already moving towards. So with that, I'll jump back to the questions, and I'll ask the hosts if there are any verbal questions that we want to hit before I sort of scan through and maybe attempt to answer some of the ones in the chat box. Any that you received multiple times that you want to highlight? Anything that that seemed to come up more than once?
A lot of people are asking about getting a copy of the slides, Josh. So
Yeah.
I think your next slide has an email address on it. Is that where they should request those slides from?
It does. Actually, I'll tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and give you my email address. That's a general info email address. It goes to
Okay.
our sort of our general admin. I will, as a follow-up to this, give this out in writing, but please email or call me. It's jgolden, JGOLDEN, at cap-rx.com. If you want, I'll go ahead and type that into the
I already beat you to it.
Ah, look at that. All right, I'm also going to give you my cell phone number, which is 404-862-3605. My parents would be having a panic attack seeing me broadcast my cell phone number on a webinar, but this is how excited we are to engage with people that are actually interested in coming on this journey with us to that next generation PBM model. So. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? So again, thank you for your interest in the slides. To those that want to share this story or share this information with colleagues, a really fantastic next step would be to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to do one-on-one sessions, educate your teams, educate your friends and colleagues. We could work through some of this content or even other content that hits on other areas of interest. I know I saw a lot of questions about NADAC and about some of the technical aspects of it, how frequently is it published, how delayed is it, if a group has claims coming in, when is that NADAC price published? Again, I'm happy to answer most of these. I think since some of these are fairly technical, it might make sense for us to maybe put together a bit of a Q&A that we could distribute as a PDF. Would that be something that as a host you'd be comfortable with to help address some of these questions?
Yeah, I think that's great.
Okay, great. Well, we're coming up on the end of the hour here. Do a quick scan. Let's see. Yeah, we have a question here about our client mix, primarily commercial clients, that is plan sponsors, labor unions, as well as now health plans. We do have our own adjudication platform. We didn't really spend time talking about our IT stack as a PBM. We are very publicly a disruptive PBM in the industry, as I hope you've seen from this presentation, but we are also quietly one of the fastest growing healthcare IT companies. So we run on our own rails, which means we have an adjudication platform, which we also provide software as a service basis to health plans and other strategic partners in the industry, other PBMs, for example. So we do have a mix of different types of clients. When it comes to our commercial clients, it's a full service PBM solution, soup to nuts, from implementation, member call center. All of that is in-house and managed domestically by us onshore. So we got a question. What is Judy? That is, Judy is our affectionate name for our adjudication platform. I'm glad you noticed that. I'm not sure where that showed up in the deck, but yeah, we do have that full claims platform. We call it Judy. Those that are interested in the geekier tech side of things, happy to do a full debrief on Judy, as well as we actually do live demos of that platform for those that really want to sort of pop the hood and get a sense of how the engine is running. So, all right, well, again, tons of fantastic questions. I regret that we didn't have time to dip into all of them, especially some of those more technical ones. But I do know that I think we're going to receive those questions along with the email addresses for folks that ask them. So if you'll grant me that privilege, I would love to reach out with formal responses, make sure that all your questions get answered as a follow-up to this session. And I want to, again, thank the Self-Insurance Institute of America, SIIA, for the opportunity to meet with all of you today. Really appreciated the chance to share our story. Thanks very much.